When Babur died in 1530, he was succeeded by his eldest son, Humayun. The young prince was unfamiliar with the lands he inherited, as most of his time was spent outside of India. He had returned to Central Asia after having spent a year fighting his father's wars for conquest in 1526. He only returned to India after he received the news of his father's illness, shortly before he died. Upon his succession of the Mughal throne, Humayun faced a revolt led by his own brothers. Each of them had their own dynastic ambitions, and they claimed independence from their older brother's rule. Mirza Kamran ruled Kabul, as was his father's wish. However, soon after Babur's death, he expanded his dominion over Kandahar, parts of Central Asia, and Punjab. The main rivalry among brothers was between Humayun and Kamran, while the younger ones, Hindal and Askari, switched their loyalty between them as they pleased. On some occasions, they claimed independence for the regions they controlled. It came to the point where Kamran's forces killed his younger brother Hindal, and an angered Humayun ordered him and Askari to be exiled. The four brothers also had a cousin, who Babur had adopted as a son, named Mirza Sulayman. That he ruled Badakhshan after Babur's death, and he also accepted the overlordship of Humayun and Kamran, depending on where the political power at the given moment was. He also asserted autonomy for his regions against the will of Babur's sons. While Humayun, Kamran, Hindal, and Askari died fighting each other, Sulayman outlived them all. Humayun inherited a large empire, and to effectively control it, he needed to be familiar with the policies and techniques of ruling. Unfortunately, the young prince was not. Instead, he sought to install himself as a divine symbol of power, and he organized his court in the image of the cosmic order as it was seen by 16th century Islam. He thought of himself as the center of the microcosmos that was his court. He was divine, and as such, he wore a veil over his face, sheltering it from the curious courtiers who wanted to bask in his divine splendor. He would occasionally lift his veil and allow his subjects to be dazzled by the light of his image. Personally, he was a follower of the Shatari Sufi mysticism order, which sought to control the cosmic forces through the practice of yoga. It was Humayun who ordered all of his royal tents to be divided into 12 parts, with each part representing one of the zodiac signs. Also, he named the days of the week by celestial bodies and dressed ritually according to what day it was. For example, Tuesday was Mars Day, and he would dress in red robes to symbolically represent the celestial body. Also, he devoted Tuesday to sentencing criminals and war prisoners. Humayun believed that his imaginative ritualistic rule would persuade his brothers about his supremacy. He divided the administration of the empire according to the natural elements. The military was fire, while the land and building administration was earth. The irrigation of the empire was entrusted to the Ministry of Water, while his own household was administered by the element of air. Each state official had to wear a robe in the color that belonged to the element of his ministry. The military wore red, land and buildings wore brown robes, the water ministry wore blue, and the royal household was dressed in white. But all of these efforts of symbolism failed to impress his rival brothers, his Central Asian followers, and his new subjects, whether they were Muslim or not. His Central Asian commanders, in particular, resisted his effort to centralize the power in his own persona. They wanted the old ways where they were given positions in the governance, and Humayun had to face repeated uprisings due to his policies. Even though Humayun was not familiar with his new Mughal empire, upon succeeding the throne, he decided to conquer as much of South Asia as possible. He wanted to continue his father's military momentum even though he was surrounded by very rich and powerful rulers and warlords. The central and lower Ganges plains had an ever-shifting coalition of Indo-Afghans and the Sultanate of Bengal. The coalition was supported by local magnates and landowners. Against them, Humayun had some initial victories, but the real threat came from the southwest, where Sultan Bahadur Shah of Gujarat ruled. Bahadur Shah sought Babur's help when he was fleeing the wrath of his own father and older brother during the dynastic struggle in the Gujarat region. But Babur denied him any help, and he described Bahadur Shah in his writings as a bloodthirsty and audacious man. Nevertheless, Bahadur managed to seize the throne of his father, putting him in charge of the main ports of India, which were crucial for the international trade across the Indian Ocean. Because of this, Bahadur was extremely wealthy, and he used his riches to secure the loyalties of other rulers in the region that he hired and maintained a large army, which he supplied with expensive artillery. He even had Mustafa Rumi Khan as a commander of his artillery forces. One of the gunpowder experts mentioned earlier, Bahadur Shah was powerful enough to challenge Humayun, and he did so by attacking the Chittor fort, which defended the point of access to Hindustan. The first attack on the fort was launched in 1533, but it was unsuccessful, and it was followed by a second attack in 1534. Humayun arrived too late to save the fortress, but he decided to invade and conquer his enemy's territory, Gujarat. The armies met at Malwa, where Sultan Bahadur Shah decided to entrench his army behind the fort walls, which were defended by cannons. However, Humayun's forces besieged the fort and starved the army, forcing it to flee. After seeing the defeat, Rumi Khan decided to switch to Humayun's side and join his efforts in conquering Gujarat. Bahadur Shah sought refuge with the governor of Portuguese India, Nuno de Cunha, who resided on the fortified island of Gyo. However, Bahadur met his death on the island, as the negotiations with the governor did not go well that he drowned, but it remains unclear if his death was an assassination or an accident as he was fleeing from the Portuguese. While Humayun was on his military expedition to conquer the southwestern region of India, a rebellion rose in Hindustan, and his military commanders begged him to return home and deal with the rebels. But Humayun was convinced in his intentions to subdue the rich Gujarat territory, and he did not want to go back to Hindustan. His Central Asian generals then decided to support his younger half-brother, Askari, who was already in Agra, where he had proclaimed himself the sovereign. Humayun was forced to abandon his plans in Gujarat, as he had to secure his power back in Hindustan. That he managed to gain his throne back, and he even forgave his younger brother. But the military expenses were high, and since he had abandoned Gujarat, he had nothing to give in reward to his commanders. He needed loot in order to reward his supporters, who already showed how easily their loyalties could be lost. Humayun needed another military expedition urgently, and so he marched his forces down the Ganges toward Bengal, where Indo-Afghan of the Sur clan, Sher Shah Suri, ruled. He was also known as Sher Khan, Lion Lord. Humayun's first major goal was to capture the Chinar fortress in 1537, which was placed in a strategically important geographical location in the region. The fortress was well defended by cannons on its walls, but Humayun's artillery prevailed after the 4-month siege. Rumi Khan came up with the idea of placing the cannons on riverboats to bombard the fortress walls directly. They caused so much damage that Sher Shah's son, who commanded the fortress, agreed to negotiations. With the loss of Chinar, Sher Shah was forced to officially submit to the rule of Humayun. Because of his innovative tactics, Rumi Khan received this fortress as a reward. However, he was Indian, and as such, he stood out of the Central Asian circle of Humayun's commanders. He was assassinated by those commanders as soon as he fell into imperial disfavor. Humayun's forces continued marching over Bengal in search of new treasures and rewards for the military. However, they were unaccustomed to the humidity of this area, and they suffered greatly. Even Humayun gave up the direct command of his forces and chose to close himself in his pleasure palace with his wives and concubines, enjoying opium. The situation back in Hindustan went sour once more when another of Humayun's half-brothers, this time Hindal, proclaimed himself to be the new ruler in Agra. Humayun had to go back and secure his throne once more, but it was the monsoon season, and the roads were impassable. Since Humayun had to delay his return to Hindustan, it created the opportunity for Sher Shah to reorganize his forces and block Humayun's return home. It was in June 1539, as Humayun's forces were marching back to Hindustan, that Sher Shah met them once more at Chausa. This time, he had a more effective army, which managed to defeat the Mughal soldiers who were already dispirited by the harsh environment of Bengal. Humayun lost many of his Central Asian commanders, and one of his wives was killed, while the other one was captured. Humayun had to flee, and while crossing the river with his army, he nearly drowned. In his biography, it is recorded that a poor water carrier named Nizam rescued the emperor, but it also says that Nizam was rewarded by being named emperor for a day. However, this act enraged Humayun's commanders and courtiers, and they raised the question of his legitimacy to the throne, that if he could transfer the sovereignty so freely, and to a man of low birth no less. What was so divine in him that demanded their respect? This disdain from his commanders continued to deepen as Humayun lost control over some of the Mughal territories. Furthermore, he was constantly challenged by his own brothers, and he had a bad opium habit that led him to resign from active rule from time to time. It is no wonder that Humayun's support was lessening each day. In 1540, Humayun was resolved to return his lost prestige, and he decided to attack Sher Shah again. However, he lost once more, this time in the Battle of Bilgram on May 17, 1540. The records note that his army was so demoralized that it scattered even before the main battle began. Humayun, with the help of an Afghan soldier, managed to escape. He decided to lavishly reward this soldier and admit him into the royal household, which created an even deeper divide between him and his commanders. This Afghan soldier, Shamsuddin Muhammad Akka Khan, would later become Humayun's son's foster father. Sher Shah drove Humayun out of Hindustan, and with the loss of the supporters in his own empire, Humayun had to search for refuge in Punjab. After only 14 years, the Mughal Empire had ended. Sher Shah ruled in place of Humayun, but he did not rule as a Mughal emperor. Instead, he created his own dynasty in northern India, and the territory that was previously known as the Mughal Empire now became the Sur Empire. Sher Shah ruled for 7 years, from 1538 to 1545, and as a leader, he set up a new administration. Even though he ruled the area of Hindustan, Sher Shah chose Sasaram for his capital instead of Agra. The economic and military reorganization he implemented under his governance would further be used by the Mughals. Sher Shah contributed to the empire in so many ways that his Mughal successors would come to idolize him. He was the emperor who introduced the first rupiah, a silver coin whose name would later become a standard for the currency in the Indian subcontinent. He also organized the first Indian post office. Indeed, Sher Shah's accomplishments during his very short rule would be remembered forever. Even his nemesis Humayun referred to him as Ustad-i-Badshahin, the teacher of kings. However, not all was well within Sher Shah's empire. He was accused of leading religious persecutions, and his governance allowed religious violence across the provinces of northern India. He advised his own commanders that they should die during these religious persecutions and wars, for if they died while fighting against the infidels, they would become martyrs. His army oppressed the Hindus of India, in particular. 1. Such religious persecution took place at the Kalinjar fort, where every Hindu person, men, women, and children, was put to death. Sher Shah is also known for the destruction of many cities. In order to build a new city, he would destroy the historical site of the previous settlement and then build his city on its ruins. The city of Shergar is the best example of this practice. This city used to be a site where Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism peacefully coexisted. The ruins of the previous settlement provide evidence of a thriving city's existence that preceded Sher Shah's rule. Humayun the exile. Humayun was still officially Padshah, and he sought some way to regain his empire. For that, he needed his place of exile to be strategically positioned for the reconquest of Hindustan. His brother Mirza Kamran held Kabul, but he would not allow Humayun and his court passage to the Central Asian homeland. That he thought of invading Kashmir, but his commanders were against it. Finally, he contemplated giving up on his empire and becoming a calendar, a holy man of the Sufi order. In the end, a decision was made to move across the Thar Desert into Sindh, a province of modern Pakistan. Humayun's court was constantly shrinking, as his Central Asian commanders who served under his father all left him. But he still had some riches, enough to be respected among some of his people, but not enough to reward his supporters. In Sindh, some of the landowners were respectful enough to provide his small entourage with food, while others tried to drive him away from their lands. However, Humayun still had the loyalty of a Turkish warrior named Bayram Khan, whose family had been in the service of Babur. With his help and that of his soldiers, Humayun was able to extract enough provisions from those locals who were not willing to part with their possessions. According to his biography, which was written by his half-sister Gulbadan, Humayun was attracted to a daughter from a Persian family who was in his entourage. Her name was Hamida Begum, and she was in her early teens. She declined his marriage proposal, thinking she was not worthy of a man of such high status. Her father also objected as Humayun was too poor to marry at that time, But both her and her family eventually were persuaded, and a year after the wedding, in October of 1542, Hamida gave birth to a son named Akbar. That a few months later, Humayun's entourage was attacked by his half-brother Askari, and he nearly captured Humayun. But he managed to escape, and together with Hamida and 30 of his faithful followers, he started the long march to Persia. However, his son Akbar was left behind and became his uncle's royal prisoner. A year later, Askari passed Akbar to Kamran, Humayun's brother, who ruled Kabul. Humayun and his followers marched through mountains and valleys, and in these hostile areas, they were forced to kill their horses in order to eat their meat, which they cooked in soldiers' helmets. Humayun wrote a letter to Shah Tahmasp I of the Safavid dynasty about his coming to Persia. The letter was submissive and handwritten, a gesture that touched the court of Tahmasp so much that they welcomed Humayun and his followers with the greatest of honors. While visiting Persia, Humayun was amazed by its architecture and art, and later, he would employ Persian artists in his own court. The two rulers did not meet for the first 6 months of Humayun's stay in Persia, but once they did, many lavish parties were organized to celebrate the occasion. There is even a wall painting depicting the meeting of the two monarchs, and it still survives in Shah Shah town, Iran. Shah Tahmasp treated the disgraced Mughal emperor with all the royal honors he could bestow, but he urged Humayun to convert from his Sunni beliefs to Shia Islam, which he accepted. His Mughal followers were reluctant to convert, but eventually, they agreed, as they saw that it was the only way in which Tahmasp would support Humayun's reconquest of the Mughal Empire. After he converted to Shia, Humayun proved to be of true value to Tahmasp. When Kamran offered Kandahar, located in today's Afghanistan, for the exchange of Humayun, Tahmasp refused him. In fact, the Persian ruler was so enraged that Kamran wanted Humayun dead that he prepared a great celebration, in which he announced he was giving Humayun 12,000 cavalrymen to attack Kamran. In return, he wanted to receive Kandahar from Humayun's own hands. Humayun started his mission to retake his empire in 1545, but it would take him over a decade to succeed. He started slowly by attacking Kandahar, where Askari ruled, with the help of Tahmasp's 12,000 cavalrymen. The city fell after being besieged for 4 weeks. As promised, he gave the city to Tahmasp, who appointed his infant son as its viceroy. However, the boy soon died, and Humayun thought himself strong enough to confront Tahmasp and rule the city by himself. But after some negotiations, the two monarchs agreed to install a governor who would rule the city under their joint sovereignty. The same year, Humayun marched his army to take Kabul. Kamran Mirza was not loved by his people, and when his soldiers saw Humayun's Persian army approaching, they changed sides. Numbering in the hundreds, Kabul was taken over with ease, and Humayun was reunited with his son, Akbar. They organized a large feast in the boy's honor. However, Kamran survived the onslaught, and he built a new army outside the city walls. He would cause Humayun to lose Kabul twice, but each time he did so, Humayun would manage to regain the city once more. Humayun thought of continuing and returning Hindustan under his rule, but he was aware the time was not right. Instead, he organized smaller raids, gaining more and more of his homeland territory back, which he would give as a reward to his commanders. This tactic attracted local warlords who offered their bands to Humayun's service. Thus, his army constantly grew. Humayun suffered constant attacks from his brothers Kamran and Askari, who even captured his son Akbar on a few occasions. Each time, he would forgive them until, in 1551, during a raid, they killed Hindal, who was, at the time, the subject of Humayun. To punish his brothers, Humayun exiled them both, but not before blinding Kamran. With all of his 3 brothers out of his way, Humayun could concentrate on recovering Hindustan. He managed to recruit Persians and the younger generation of Central Asian warriors who did not remember his own failures. In 1555, he took the opportunity of the existing dynastic struggle in the Sher Empire to launch his first attack. Briefly, Sher Shah had died 10 years earlier when Humayun was not ready to attack. Sher Shah's successor, Sher Shah Suri, died in 1554, creating turmoil and rivalry among his 3 successors. All 3 Suri princes marched on Delhi to try and capture it, while the local leaders fought for their independence. The setting was perfect for a Mughal invasion. Humayun placed his trust in Bairam Khan, a Turkish warlord who was a great tactician, and in February 1555, they captured Lahore and Rhoda's fort. After those conquests, his army took Dipalpur and Jalandhar in Punjab, moving toward Delhi, where he planned to take the throne. Humayun and Bairam Khan met the Suri army, which numbered 30,000 men. The Mughal army easily defeated their enemy and occupied Sirhind, but Sher Shah Suri, one of the Suri pretenders to the throne, gathered an army of 80,000 soldiers and attacked Sirhind on June 22 in d. 1555. That, however, Bairam Khan, the brilliant tactician, imitated the attack Sher Shah Suri had led against Humayun in the Battle of Chausa in 1539, and he defeated the Suri army once more. Humayun's path to Delhi was now open, and he quickly occupied the city, thus re-establishing the Mughal Empire. Humayun decided to take a different approach to ruling his empire than before. Instead of a centralized state, he opted for the decentralization of the empire. He divided the empire into 6 semi-autonomous provinces that would be governed by different commanders. Humayun would be the paramount ruler to his new provinces of Delhi, Agra, Kannauj, Jaunpur, Mandu, and Lahore. He moved from province to province with his nomadic court and army, and he would supervise his governors and offer them his personal support when needed. Humayun's young son Akbar was sent to Lahore, where he would learn from Bairam Khan, whose task was to secure Punjab. Kabul was given to his second son, Mirza Muhammad Hakim, who was still an infant and needed the capable supervision of a trusted guardian. 7 months after he restored the Mughal Empire, Humayun tripped while going down the steep stairs of his library, seriously injuring himself. 3 days later, on January 27, 1556, Humayun died from his injuries. It is said that Humayun had his arms full of books when he heard the call to prayer while descending the steps of the library. By habit, he bent his knee in a religious bow, but his foot caught his robe, and he tumbled down the steps, hitting his head on the edge of a stone. Humayun was first buried inside a fort named Puranaquila, but his first wife, Bega Begum, commissioned a grand garden tomb in Delhi to be built in the Mughal style for her husband. This tomb was so grandiose that it set an example for the later Taj Mahal in Agra.